Welcome to the Therapist Burnout Podcast, episode 79. So, I wanted to start today with a statistic I recently read in a recent survey on burnout conducted by Moodle that 66% of American workers are feeling burnout this year. And those under 35, it's over 80%. We are constantly being asked to keep going, to keep pushing. Constant pings of our phone demand attention. And I think we know by now that rest isn't a luxury, it's essential. So I am going to have a couple more. This is the second to last episode in my Structured Rest series where I'm talking about sabbaticals today. So, all different types of sabbaticals. And I think the deeper idea is returning to a rhythm, perhaps seasonal rhythms, regular rituals of rest that mirror what we see in nature: pauses, cycles, stillness. So, I'm going to share today kind of the history on what sabbaticals are, even the definition of the word. I think doing a high level kind of what are we even talking about is helpful. Kind of my reflections of trying me teaching nervous system regulation to people after with brain injury and trauma survivors for a very, very long time. Myself trying to work in modern society, and just a recent realization that I don't think I've truly been offline for an extended period, except for this recent cruise that I was on where I had to pay $20 a day for Wi-Fi. And so I declined that cost and was not on Wi-Fi during that time. And why we stay so attached to work now in modern life. I think we all know why, but that's adding to it. And then at the end, I'm going to help you think of some sabbatical practices that you can fit into your life for daily, weekly, monthly, and annual rest. Okay. So this episode, I just feel like is really core to my thinking on burnout, but just on modern life as well. So even if you're not a therapist, I have some friends from my life who tell me they're listening to my podcast that I play tennis with. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know you were privy to all my innermost thoughts on my podcast, but thank you for listening. It's just weird when, you see someone in the wild that and they're like, "Oh yeah, you were talking about this," and like, "Are you okay? Because you were talking about being depressed and stuff." So, yeah, that's what comes with having like a very public digital footprint, I'm guessing. So, here we go. Let's jump into it. So, I think that I have been pulled towards rest since my peak burnout in 2020. I think a lot of us had that sense of, wow, when work really shifted for most of us, not for everybody, but for most of us, we had this huge shift with just life. A lot of things we didn't have to hold anymore because it just wasn't happening. Life wasn't really happening like it was. And I think we had this like glimmer into like, oh, let's all start farming and quilting. Like I still have some fabric because I used to quilt. And I had all these ambitions of like, oh, I'm going to start quilting because I'm just going to be home. Never did that. I did like garden a little bit more, and like in subsequent years, I feel like my garden has looked worse since 2020, but it looked good in 2020. And I feel like I've been trying to chase this sustainable rhythm for rest ever since. And I know that I need it more because my body basically shut down on me. Hi, I'm Dr. Jen Blanchett. I talk about burnout and my own stories with burnout and also those other stories, which I hope to bring more on the podcast if I can schedule them in to have them on here. But I think many people reach out to me all the time and say, I can't do this anymore. I can't work this way anymore. I need a break. I am utterly at the end of my rope. I'm exhausted. And I just want to offer to you that, first of all, what if rest isn't indulgent? What if it's available to you? I know a lot of times you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't even think. Like I have kids and I have all the things spinning and la, 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 la. I get that. And there's a system, and I'm not trying to minimize the system that we are in is awful. Like 100%. I get all that. And I want to provide you some agency for your own change as well. At the same time, I don't see things changing right now with the system of mental health, with healthcare, with the current climate politically that's going on. I don't see big sweeping changes happening to the careers of therapists or to other people. So I just want to talk a little bit about what maybe taking a sabbatical looks like. So I wanted to take it way back and just look at the definition of the word sabbatical. So it comes from the word Shabbat, which means to stop, to rest, to let be. And in Hebrew culture, this comes from the Hebrew language, from Jewish culture. Every seventh year was a sabbatical. The land was left they didn't tend the land. People rested. And I read in another thing that they didn't tend the land, and the poor people were able to eat off the land during that time. Debts were forgiven. I think this recent political climate where, I have student loan debt still. I know a lot of us do, but there was like this kind of rally cry around like, hey, in the Bible, it says debts were forgiven after 7 years. Maybe you suggest that, hey, I've been paying on my debts for 15 years. Maybe someone will forgive mine. Hasn't happened yet. Ugh, but there's hope. Maybe. Who knows? Uh, and this isn't like a religious podcast, just if you're just landing here. I think I'm just offering this as kind of history of the word and my own religious tradition and what I've experienced through that. And I don't subscribe to a particular philosophy or ideology currently, except that I'm open to different ideologies and just gaining wisdom and knowledge from different structures and beliefs and rituals. So, with that knowledge, we'll go forward. So, the system that was designed for sustainability, not production, not eking every little bit of production out. And we see this in academia, right? I think most of this audience has been to college if you're therapists or healers. I think I remember a professor going on sabbatical a couple of times in my academic career. I mean, not the same professor, but maybe one or two had gone on a semester sabbatical where they were going to travel and maybe write or something on sabbatical. And I've seen reference to early psychoanalysts taking the month of August as a rhythm of not seeing clients in the month of August, which is very different from what we do today, right? I think modern day therapists see full-time therapists. Some are not working full-time by choice. Maybe they're caring in other ways at home. Most of you are women or female identifying, about 80% of this podcast listenership. So I mostly talk to women, but hey guys, if you're here, or male identifying folk, that's not the reality today, right? A lot of us are seeing 25 clients or whatever our full looks like a week and doing the best we can because that's what we need to do to live and sustain ourselves and our lives. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the rituals of rest that I had growing up. So Friday nights in my house growing up, we celebrated Shabbat or Sabbath. So we went to a Messianic Jewish congregation, which meant we believed in some Jewish tradition and some Christian tradition. And so we would have Chinese takeout and my mom would light Shabbat candles. And I remember, very hot summers with my brother sweating over like rice noodles, Singapore style, which is like really hot rice noodles. I love rice noodles, but not like the hot ones. I don't know. I like hot food, but not rice noodle. That was my mom and brother's saying. And why my brother was always sweating because of number one, hot food. And number two, my dad never turned on the AC because it had to be like 90 degrees at least in the house, or maybe it was 85. He would turn it on. Kind of similar in the winter, like we, would plan to play games early in the winter, like how long can we go without starting a fire or turning the heat on? Like we would turn it on when he wasn't home, but he would not turn it on. Yeah, I was raised that way. I think, I don't follow that religious tradition anymore, but I feel like these rituals have been either from a religious tradition, have been in human cultures for many, many times of rest, of having a weekly time of rest. And I think that really lives in our body too, that we're craving this ritual of rest, not just okay, where does work begin and end? And when do we stop? Because we're not stopping in modern life. And I think in my family, in my family system, they have they're people, we're humans, right? But it was modeled what rest looks like. My mother rested. And I thank her for letting me see her rest, laying down and taking a nap and reading. I really think that that was good that she modeled that for me. And I think through what it meant to sit down together and not we didn't have phones then, obviously, but my mom took the phone, like, on the hook with the wire. She would take it off the hook. And, there's another funny story about her taking a phone off the hook. Maybe I'll tell on the podcast another time, but it ended in me and a police officer needing to drive me home for another time, perhaps. Maybe I'll save it for the newsletter, get you over there. But, what would it be like if we, lit a candle at the end of the workday and just kinda noticed, like, "I'm gonna light this candle," and just noticed kinda have a reference with my meal, even, like, setting the table, spending time, like, really just focusing on the meal, focusing on the people that you're sharing that meal with, even if it's your dog, because I got a puppy and they're like people. There's research on that actually, that our animals, um they mirror the connection we have in human relationships, so we cannot minimize those animal connections at all. I'm really kind of claiming the rest that we need as the world demands more from us. I think even the summer, I technically have the summer off. I'm podcasting and I'm not seeing any clients, consulting clients, therapist clients. I have one right now, but that is all, which is really a little lift for me that I have one person that I'm working with and I'm working on content. So for the fall to launch some groups perhaps and a course on practice closure. But I'm really struggling with this time off to really disconnect, if I'm being honest. And I think on this, I just took a cruise and it was one of the first times where I haven't been online since I think 2012 when we took a cruise, 2013 when we took a cruise when I was pregnant with my first son. And I think even when we tell ourselves, "All right, let's put the phone away. We're gonna," I've done excursions on a vacation where I've left the phone, in the room, and I've gone on the excursion and not really had my phone with me. But maybe I'd check it at the end of the day. I still had access to email, social, texts, perhaps not in the country. If I was out of the country, I didn't have access to text, but I still had access mostly to email. And I remember certainly as a therapist in private practice, I never had someone who my clients would call. So if I did have a client contact me via email, I felt like I still had that clinical burden even on vacation. So when we're off, we're not really off. Kind of like if we had, if they're like kids at home and they're not with us, we'd still be thinking about them. We'd still be like worried something would be going wrong with them. I think that's human, that's normal. But I think a true sabbatical requires more than time. It requires detachment. It requires stepping away. It requires truly resting from our roles, our phones, the pressure to keep producing. And it becomes harder and harder as life gets faster and faster. And I think we've all kinds of data to back that up. I think when I read Anxious Generation, I think I did a podcast on that last summer when I found that book about the advent of the smartphone and social media and what that has meant for the changes in mental health and loneliness in our culture since that time. And I think it's calling me towards figuring it out and not so much I think early on in my burnout, I was really focused on like, okay, I just have to like figure out a way that I can work. And I was still gripping pretty tightly from scarcity. And scarcity still is there, y'all. It's still there, still shows up all the time. It's like a little friend, keeps coming back. But I know what I need to do is get into these rhythms of rest, of connection, the things that I talked about in the last episode. So check out episode 77. If you haven't checked that out, check it out of what to add back into your life. And have me think about like, where did this really start? Where did we start overworking as a human race. And many books have talked about the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s and 1800s. Work shifted from seasonal and agriculture. I cannot speak, y'all, with this cold. Seasonal and agricultural rhythms. That's the best I'm going to do. To factory clocks and hourly labor, productivity and profit were prioritized over rest and well being. And laborers worked for 10, 16-hour days, 6 days a week, with no mandated time off. Uh, there was child labor. I mean, there was all kinds of things that were wrong. And I think before, when there were these seasonal rhythms to work, there was that push for the harvest, right? Where they had to get all the crops in and you had to put up the food because you needed to store for the winter. And I read something, I don't know which book, it might have been Slow Productivity, which I read again. I was finishing that over the cruise. Cal Newport, shout out to Slow Productivity. I believe it was his book. He was talking about, even in like a winter solstice where they would look forward to celebrating the winter solstice because it wasn't just the dark time of the year when there was a lack of food, but also was something to look forward to, a time of connection, of coming together, of sharing in a time where it was dark. And I think the Protestant, work ethic certainly took hold that in America anyway, that hard work is a virtue, that rest is laziness. And in 1938, there was the Fair Labor Standards Act, which instituted the 5-day, 40-hour work week, which was revolutionary, that we didn't have to work like 10 to 16 hours a day in a factory. And that was a new standard. But what is it really based on? It's not based on human capacity, especially with knowledge work. And I think when knowledge work came out and when caring work started, I think even thinking about caring work was rooted in Christianity and missionary work and mothering, roles historically assigned to women. And early female social workers were praised for being selfless and modest and service oriented. They didn't expect to have an income. So you're just giving because that's what you're supposed to do, because women don't work, women help and do this because it's a calling, not a job. And it's rooted in patriarchy and racism as well. And I think it became internalized into our field, that overwork and continuing to be there for the client despite low pay, despite not having what we need in our lives, we have to overlook that because the client, the work comes first. And I think, certainly as we've over the, decades, I'm jumping around decades. But I think as, personal computers came and the erosion of boundaries between work and home fell away, it became normalized that, oh yeah, I'll get to that email at home. I think more and more people are trying to put more boundaries against that. And thank God that Google has if you answer an email at night or at a different time, you can schedule it to go out at 8 a.m. I definitely always recommend that if you choose to work outside of a work hour. You don't want people to contact you with, have that email go off at like 8 a.m. so they don't think you're working, because we don't want that. But I even felt that in my early days when I was a caseworker, early in my career, I started working as a residential counselor, and there were paper notes that we would write into a chart, and there was no work to take home. There just wasn't any work that I had to take home. When the day was done, it was done. I left, goodbye. And I didn't think about it, honestly, except for, getting hit in the head with a basketball and other things that were really scary that happened there that we don't, talk enough about. Like our nervous system, has to, you know, deal with the things that have happened, years of experience that we had. But essentially, I didn't have work at home with that job. And I think that mostly continued until I always brought home my schoolwork, but that was normalized that you bring home schoolwork to do papers and things of that nature, like writing. But I also had time where I wasn't working full time to complete my schoolwork. But I don't think there was this expectation that I would complete, at least for myself or from my employer, that I would be answering email until really the last, I would say, 10 years. That became more normalized. and start to become more spillover at home. And it became more normal, like, okay, well, I'll just tackle that like Saturday morning or in the evening, or I don't know when I'll do that. And what I know and what most of you likely know is that your nervous system needs the rest to function. When I work with folks, I often talk about this, but I work with folks who had a brain injury, often early on in their injury. I would talk about nervous system regulation, and it really was for them experimenting with how much work can they really do before their brain completely shuts down on them and makes them rest. And in extreme burnout, I see the same thing happening. Therapists are pushing themselves until they're burning and they're done. They can't do it anymore, or they're taking days off. They're canceling sessions. I've definitely done that where I've had half days where I need to cancel sessions. And early on, when I started contract work, there were days where I just could not work. I had to lay down, and it felt really scary. It reminded me of my clients after their injuries where they were spinning like, what am I going to do? How am I going to work? How am I going to pay my bills? This is my life. I work at this job. And I think for you therapists, especially, we're not designed to constantly hold so much. And if you listen back to that podcast that I did on interoception, so that was episode 71, Why We Wait Until We're Burnt, Interoception, Burnout and Therapist Mental Health. Such an important episode for every therapist to listen to. We fail to respond to our body's cues because we have been socialized to suppress them. So a lot of times, our colleagues will tell us, well, just go rest, go take a day off. And we're beyond that. If you are at end stage burnout, you are beyond the like yoga class, the day of rest, take a week off. We're talking about deep nervous system care. You need a reset. And it reminds me of those brain injury clients that I had that needed to they would just it would be day by day, hour by hour. Okay, what can I do today? Okay, I guess I could, work for an hour, or I couldn't do any computer work today. And it's not that extreme, I think, with therapists, but it just reminds me of that same posture. So from that, I want to start thinking of a sabbatical rhythm. And I recently listened to this podcast. It's this woman, she's what's her name? Oh, Brooke Castillo. She founded a life coach school, and she has a podcast. I think it's called the same name. Anyway, she developed this method. It's CBT, y'all. It's basic CBT. And it's reductive in a lot of ways to, we change our thoughts, we're going to change our emotions, just kind of basic CBT. And I almost signed up to be in that life coach school, but then I was just like, come on. This is basic CBT. But then part of me is also like, yeah, but part of me does need to continue to do that thought work because there is something there. And we can't minimize the impact of trauma in our nervous system, which I feel like that's where having a full integrated approach to how we're thinking about things, which I know many of you do, is important. But why I say this is she took a year off of work and had no work scheduled, like none. It just had me really imagine, like, what would it be like to not work for a year, like an entire year? And that's just kind of mind blowing to me. And part of me wants to figure it out. Like, what could I do to not work for a year? That would be wild. I'm still kind of playing around with how could I do that? Would it be like really not needing as much income? I don't know. But I think getting radical about your needs for sabbaticals are important. And it's something I'm going to start listening to my body more about because when I need to be off, I need to be completely off and just living my damn life. And I got a little taste and glimmer in this on that cruise where, yes, my kids were crazy and I wanted to leave that cruise on day 10 like nobody's business. Like, you have no idea. And it was fun. Like, there were parts that were just wonderful and so cool and fun, and I was ready to go. Both things can be true, this. But I also, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to take a yoga class. I want to take this TRX strength class. I'm going to sit on the balcony and have coffee. Hopefully my kids will let me do that. That's going to be awesome. And I did a couple of those things. I ordered a room service. and had coffee in my room, which felt so luxurious to be on a cruise because it's free. You can get free coffee to the room. And so what does that look like to have that in my life now? Like to have a slow morning with coffee. I need to do that at least once a week. And so that is one of my non-negotiables that I'm going to put in of a sabbatical rhythm that I need to practice, where I just have a morning where I drink my coffee, and maybe I have a journal, maybe I don't. Maybe I just, especially in the summer, I sit outside. And the idea is that we're having some non-productive rest and not like some journaling ritual crap of like miracle morning at 4 a.m. No, 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 we're done. We don't need to do that. And also on this cruise, I was going to do all the yoga classes. And instead, I just played pickleball like every morning until I got sick, which is, probably because I was doing too much pickleball. But it was just like so fun to try something new and fun and be patient with myself about not being good at it yet. So I think trying something new is something that's important to me. And I took that energy as I came back. I think I talked a little bit on my newsletter about a situation where I came back to class, and I call it a resting gym face. A lot of my people in my class have, but one is just like legit rolling their eyes at me and doesn't like the routine that I'm doing. And it makes me want to change everything and makes me feel really inadequate. So part of me like had a new approach to it that I didn't have just from going on this cruise, which was really interesting. So I want you to think more radically about your rest. For me, definitely walking with my dog without my phone is something that is important as a daily. So let's just break them down. So I'm talking about daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual sabbatical rhythms. So first, daily mini sabbaticals. This would be without your phone. It's a non-negotiable. Okay. So for me, my daily mini sabbaticals are walking with my dog for at least 10 minutes a day. That can be right outside my house or going somewhere at least once a week. I would like to take a hike somewhere with her, because it's a double win for her and me. And I'm getting walking, I'm also getting breathing. I'm getting some stillness with being in nature. I live in a naturally beautiful place. That is great. I think also doing my 20 is important. So every 20 minutes, find something that's 20 feet in the distance, letting your eyes look at usually something natural. I got this from an OT when I worked in brain injury rehab for people who had headaches and screen fatigue. So they would do the 20 technique. Every 20 minutes, stare off at something 20 feet for 20 seconds. I think I'm getting that right, but just by my memory, we can help. And I don't know where it comes from. So it's all in the interwebs. So think of whatever mini sabbatical practices you want to have. Is that like tea for you or your coffee before you go into sessions in the morning? Whatever it is. Weekly, 2 to 3 hours of intentional non-productive rest. That could be my slow coffee morning. Also tennis, I count because I really enjoy it. It's a time I connect. I don't really think about anything else than just hitting a ball and playing tennis. It's the kind of only time where I'm not like leading something. So tennis, I count that as part of my weekly sabbatical rhythm. I might add some pickleball in there. We'll see. I'm also thinking about starting to just take a yoga class once a week. There was one I saw that I really wanted to take, and maybe reducing like the actual classes that I teach. Monthly, a full day of no work or emotional labor. So one day, maybe you start with a half day, where you take off a half day or you align your schedule so you can take a half day and see a movie or go out to coffee with a friend, go out to lunch, something like that. Quarterly, a week of rest. And I mean, rest where you're doing things that are good for your body, not like, okay, I'm planning to, work on my marketing or my copy and and I'm guilty of this. I'm like, okay, well, when I'm off for summer break, I'm going to be working on, which I am working on something. And I'm trying to do it in a mindful way, in the slow productivity way, kind of how Cal Newport talks about, of working at a normal pace, of giving myself more time, of incorporating like these practices that I want to keep in place when my busy times come. And an annual sabbatical time off. So I would love that to be at least 4 weeks for people, like at a time. So if you can change your schedule so you can get that every year, that would be great. But even a couple weeks could change your nervous system. I don't think I took 2 weeks at a time off very often when I was in private practice because it was just hard. It was really hard to do that. But I think there's, some historical evidence of a therapist doing this. I hear of it, some people doing it. But I don't think it happens a lot for most therapists, honestly. I always invite you with anything to start small. Try one thing or rhythm you could begin this week. And also be bold in your thinking. How could you really feel that sense of rest this week, this month, this year? I'm getting excited of thinking of ways I can rest now, of ways I can live my damn life today versus next year versus tomorrow, versus when I figure my practice out or figure this podcast out. You don't have to wait. It's available to you. So if this resonated, certainly, reply back to me. I have my therapist pen pal list, and that's where you have direct access to me. I send you some different stuff that I don't talk about on the podcast as well. I have a little section, it's called From the Mat, where I talk about my practice of teaching yoga class and also like getting more in touch with my body. Sometimes it's from my mat, sometimes it's from other places. But just kind of, I think, the intuitive wisdom from my body that I'm noticing through being more intentional. I think in this past year of noticing what's been coming up for me in my burnout recovery, if I'm honest. So find a way to take some sabbatical today, tomorrow, next week, next month, this year. Have a good one.